Hi, I'm Gillian Cameron, and this is Myth Congeniality. This is my weekly show of storytelling, folk tales, and mythology. And tonight I'm going to do one story, and this is an old friend of mine. This is one of the first that I started to play with, and it's called Soldier Jack. This is a story that has shown up in a lot of different places and a lot of different cultures. I got this from the telling of a gentleman by the name of Ray Hicks, who was a national treasure. He knew more Jack tales than just about anybody and was a major source of this folklore. He lived in North Carolina, and he was related, I believe he was a cousin to Frank Prophet, who was the fellow who taught Frank Warner Hang Your Head Tom Dooley, which then became a hit by the Kingston Trio. There was also a lawsuit about that because Frank Prophet got no profit from that. And so it went to court, and I believe the case was won so that folk performers at least got some credit for the pieces that were collected from them. Now that I mentioned collections, this is a treasured book of mine, Richard Chase's book of Jack tales. Jack is kind of a generic storytelling name, a little bit like Hans or Gretel, or like last week, Vasilisa. Jack shows up all through the English-speaking world, and of course he's also Jacques or Hans, etc. It's all John, and he's a bit like Bugs Bunny or Warner Brothers cartoon characters. There's no real continuum from one story to the next. And I've got to be frank with this story. I kind of had a question as to whether I should tell it at this particular time, because it does deal with death. And if you are, it's a funny story, it's a light story, but there is a dark side to it. And if you're going through some stress and you think that might trigger, then maybe you better listen at another time. But as I said, I think it's one of my favorites, and I think it is a treasure, and I think it is also fits under the idea of what is called a wisdom tale. Now, this is a Jack tale that comes from North Carolina. So be a little bit forewarned. This is also one of the wonderful things about stories that were brought by European settlers and immigrants and brought to this continent and placed in this continent. So this is American, but you'll still hear some of the European folkloric motifs in there. So, to begin, this is a story about Jack. Now, Jack, he'd been a soldier for a long, long time. He'd been through a lot of wars and a lot of fighting, saw a lot of grief. But then there was a time when there weren't no wars no more, and he didn't have a job anymore. Now, at that time, when they let you out of the army, they didn't give you no money or nothing. All they did, they let you have your uniform, they let you have your haversack, and they give you 2 loaves of bread. And that was it. Jack was satisfied with that, and he felt free, and he was walking down the road, not knowing where he was going, had 1 loaf of bread under one arm, another loaf of bread under the other arm, and he was free as a bird and feeling very good about himself. Well, as he was walking, he saw there standing in the road a beggar man. And this beggar man was hungerly and poorly and sickly. And Jack looked at him and he said, "Mister, you look hungerly and poorly and sickly. Now, I got 2 loaves of bread, so I'm going to give you 1 loaf of bread. And you take that and you get healthy and well, and God bless you." And the man was so happy he got that loaf of bread, and Jack was walking down the road and he was feeling real proud of himself because he had been so generous, until he met another beggar man a little further on, and he was hungrilier and poorlier and sicklier than the other one. And Jack looked at him, and he looked at that loaf of bread, and he looked at him and looked at the loaf of bread, and he said, this is the only, I know you're hungrily and poorly and sickly, but this is the onlyest loaf of bread I have. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to tear this in half, and you take that half a loaf of bread, and you eat that, and you get better, and get well, and God bless, and goodbye. And he started to walk down the road, and he walked, and then he thought a minute, and he turned around, and there's that man, that beggar man, standing in the road with that half a loaf of bread, and he's looking down at that loaf of bread, and back up at Jack. And Jack just couldn't help himself. He come back, he said, "Mister, there's another beggar man down the road, and I give him a whole loaf of bread, but I don't give you half, and that ain't fair. Here, you take this other half, this loaf of bread, and God bless and goodbye." And he started to walk, and the old man said, son, just hold on a second there. You come back here. You come back here. Now, you just give me the onlyest loaf of bread that you had. Now, that is an act of magnanimity, and that deserves a reward. Now, you come over here, and Jack is starting to walk away. No, you come back over here, and he reached behind a rock, and he pulled out a sack, and he says, "This looks like a regular old tater sack, don't it? But it ain't a regular old tater sack because it's magic." And he says, "All you needs to do to use this is you see anything in the world that you want, no matter how big it is, no how many there are, you just open up that sack and you say, 'Whickety whack in my sack,' and it's going to go right down, no matter how big, no matter how many, going to go right into that sack, and you just put it over your shoulder. It ain't going to weigh no more than a cat. And it's got a drawstring on it and everything. And you take that," and Jack says, "Well, thank you very much. And you come back here. I got something else here for you." He says, "You see this here? Now that looks like a regular old blue glass drinking glass, don't it? But it ain't, because it's magic. Because if you fill it 3/4 half full of water, and you look at somebody that's ailing, if the blubbers go to the top, they gonna live. But if the blubbers goes to the bottom, they gonna die. Now, it's gonna make you a good doctor. Now, you take that too, and again, use them well, and God bless you for your magnanimity." And Jack, he took the drinking glass in the sack, and he put him in his haversack, and he started to walk. And he's thinking about that old man, and he looked back after a few steps, and the old man weren't there. And he kept on walking and walking and walking. And he remembered something very important, that he hadn't eaten since he left camp, and he'd given away the onlyest pieces of bread that he had. So as he was walking, his stomach went blah, 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 blah. And then he heard something from the side. Blah, 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 blah. Now this is November. And he turned around and he saw this tree by the side of the road, and in that tree, since there weren't no leaves, he saw 24 wild turkeys, each of them sitting on a branch. And he said, "I wish I had them turkeys. Well, I ain't got a gun. They took that away from me. I wish I had a sling. All I got's a sack." And so he reached into his haversack and he looked at that tater sack, and he opened it up, And he said, turkeys, whickety whack, in my sack. All the 24 wild turkeys went boom, 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 right down into his sack. He pulled the drawstring closed, put it over his shoulder, and it didn't weigh no more than a cat. And he started to walk, and he was feeling pretty good about himself. And he was walking with them turkeys, and them turkeys are in there going, and he come to an inn, kind of hotel. And he walked into that inn, he walked right into the parlor, and the fellow owned that inn and is sitting there in his parlor, and he looks up and says, "What do you want?" Says, "Well, I'd like a room for the night." "You a soldier, ain't you?" "Well, I know what they give a soldier. They give you 2 loaves of bread, and you ain't got neither of them. So you got any money?" "No," says Jack. "Well, what you gonna pay with?" "Well, I figure I could barter with you." "What you got to barter with, son?" "Well, I got me 24 wild turkeys." "You got 24 wild turkeys? Where you got them turkeys? You got a wagon outside, boy?" No, I got them right here in the sack." "You get out of here right now." "No, I do." "Oh, you do you? Well, you open up that sack and you show me." "Well, come on outside." "No, right here." "In the parlor?" Well, he said, yeah. So Jack, he opened up that sack. 24 wild turkeys come right out of that sack, gobbling and running around. They done terrible thing to that fella's sofa, I'm telling you. At any rate, the fella looked, and he said, "Ooh, wow, then, all right then, Jack, we're doing business." And he picked up a pad and a pencil, and he licked it, and he says, "All right, that's 24 wild turkeys. That's time I carry the W. Tell you what, Jack, I'm going to give you a room for the night. I'm going to give you dinner. I'm going to give you breakfast. I'm going to give you a bed all by yourself to sleep in. And I'm going to give you 15 cents to boot. What do you say to that, Jack?" Jack said, "That sounds like a deal." And so the next morning, Jack was walking down the road again, and he got 15 cents in his shoe, which was 15 cents more than he had yesterday. And he walked, and he was feeling real good. And he come to the outskirts of the town. And he saw a house there by the side of the town, just right on the outskirts of the town. It's a beautiful house, except it looked like nobody lived there for a long time. It needed paint. There's shingles falling off, but it'd take a little bit of work, and it could serve right well. And you saw a sign right there at the front of the house, and it said, "If you can stay in this house for one night, it and 40 acres is yourn." Well, Jack says, "That sounds like a deal." So he went into town and he hunted up the fella that owned that house, and the fella said, "Well, you know, Jack, you look like a nice fella. I wouldn't want you to put you into any danger, but I have to tell you that house is haunted. And there's many of the fella gone in there, try to earn that house, and didn't come out alive in the morning." Well, Jack said he'd like to try, and the fellow gave him the keys. And Jack went in. And it was old, and it was dark, and there's furniture lying around, everything covered with dust. And he found his way into the parlor, and he found a table and a chair, and he took some victuals out of his haversack, and he started to eat. And then he heard a bit of a moaning, and then a groan, and then a whine, and a screech and a roar and more howling and all kinds of hellacious noise that was coming out of the chimney. And he saw this big cloud of soot come out of the chimney, and before you could just even think of it, boom, 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 13 little red devils come right out of that chimney. All of them about that tall, and each of them come up, and they all look up at Jack. And they grin like a fox eating chicken guts out of a wire brush. And each of them picked up a chair, and they all, boom, 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 sat around that table. And the meanest, nastiest, horriblest of them all sat right next to Jack. And he said, "Hello, Jack. Do you play cards?" And Jack says, "Well, I played some go fish in the army." "When are you gonna play poker tonight, Jack?" And the little devil pulled out a deck of cards and he put it on the table like that. And each of the devils sat there, and each of them pulled out some gold. And Jack pulled out his 15 cents and he put it right beside him on the table. And that devil shuffled the cards, and then he dealt them cards. And Jack picked up his cards, and every one of them put a penny in the pot. And Jack put a penny in the pot, and he lost. And then that little devil shuffled them cards again. Jack picked up his cards, and he lost again, and again, and again, and again, till he was down to the last penny of his 15 cents. And finally he said, "Give me them cards." And he shuffled them cards himself. And he won. And he won again, and again, and again, till he won back all of his 15 cents. And he won back all the money from all of them devils. And on that last hand, every single one of them looked up at him. And Jack knew exactly what to do. He gave a loud yell, and he kicked over that table, and he took out his sack, and he says, "Devils, wickety-whack in my sack." And all them 13 little red devils went right down his sack. He pulled the drawstring close, he threw it over in a corner, give it a couple of kicks, and he sang Methodist hymns at it until dawn. And when dawn come, in through the door come the fella that owned that house. And he had 2 other fellas with him. And they had a coffin, and when they saw Jack, that coffin fell right on the floor. And the fella that owned the house said, "Jack, what on earth are you doing alive?" Well, Jack showed him the bag with the devils in it. And they took that bag down to the blacksmith, and he took out his longest tongs and his longest hammer, because when you sup with the devil you got to use a long spoon. And he beat every single one of them devils into dust, and they put that dust in another bag, and they buried that bag down at the churchyard. And didn't that dust howl to be buried in hallowed ground? Well, Jack, he got himself that house. He settled down, and he was happy, and he done some light farming. He was there for a while. After a while, though, he got the wanderlust, and he had to go back out on the road. And so he picked up his magic sack and his magic blue glass drinking glass, and he sold that house, and he just started to walk again. And he walked, and he walked, just following his nose, until he come to a kingdom. And in that kingdom, there was a king. And that king had a daughter. And that daughter had been ailing for the longest time. And the king had put forth an edict, and it was nailed right up on the wall of the public house. And it read, "Any doctor who can cure my daughter will gain her hand in marriage and my kingdom when I die, and get to live in my house. Signed, the king. And then in little writing underneath, and by the way, if you try to cure my daughter and you fail, you gonna be beheaded. Well, folks there told him that the king was rolling in doctors' heads by that time. But Jack said he didn't mind, and so he went down to the king's house and he knocked on the door. And the king, well, he looked out of an upstairs window and says, "Who are you?" "I'm Jack." "What you want?" "I come to cure your daughter." "You a doctor?" No, I'm not. I'm just a soldier." "Well, you know, you try to cure my daughter and you fail, you gonna be beheaded." "Is that your problem or mine?" Well, the king couldn't answer that, so he went down. He brought Jack upstairs and into his daughter's bedroom. Now, I know it's not been long since dinner time, and maybe you haven't eaten yet, and I'm going to need to spare you some details. That girl, I'm not going to tell you about the condition in which he saw that girl. I'm not going to tell you how her eyes is all shriveled up like a couple of raisins just hanging loose in her head. I ain't going to tell you how all of her skin is pulled back and she's gone all kind of palely white. And I ain't going to tell you about all that green pus that came out. Every single pore was making a great big puddle underneath her on the bed. And I ain't going to tell you how the whole room smelled like a whole river full of dead dogs, because I want to save your sensibilities. But Jack, well, he looked at that girl and he turned to the king and says, "King, Mr. King, you got a pump in your backyard?" King said, "Yes, I do." "You take this glass down for me and fill it 3/4 half full of water, Jack." And the king said, "Yes, I will." And the king went down and come back, and that glass was 3/4 half full of water. And Jack, he looked through that glass, and them blubbers went straight down to the bottom. That girl was dying. She was dying right then, and if Jack didn't do something, he's gonna die too. And he knew just what to do. He pulled it out of his haversack, and he pulled out his bag, and he says, "Death, death, death, wickety whack in my sack." And all of that sickness and all of that unhealthiness and all that smell of dead dogs and all that green pus I didn't tell you about, all of it went right down into that sack. And it didn't weigh nothing. And as Jack pulled the drawstrings closed, he turned and he saw that girl sitting up in bed and just looking bright as a summer's day. And she looked over at her father. She says, "Hello, Daddy." "Hello, Princess. How are you?" "Oh, I'm fine. How are you feeling?" "Oh, I'm feeling wonderful." "Who's that?" "That's Jack. You're going to marry him." "Oh, is that so? Hello, Jack. Nice to meet you." And Jack married the princess. And he got to live with the king right there in the king's house. And he settled down with her and him, and he done him some light farming, and he give that sack to a boy, and he give that boy a nickel, and he sent him up the poplar tree in the king's backyard, and the boy tied that to a branch in that poplar tree, and that sack just hung there and hung there and hung there. And Jack, well, he lived happily, and he lived happily, and he lived, 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 until one morning Jack got up to take a walk. Getting up weren't as easy as it used to be, and he went out onto the road and putting one foot after the other. And after about an hour, he'd gone about 50 feet until, coming round the corner, he heard a moaning and a groaning and a crying and a weeping, and rather than go to it, he let it come to him, and he saw a woman. Is that what that is? Yeah, it was a woman, an old woman. She had a cane here and a cane here. Everything else was just sagging, and she's walking with them canes, and she's crying and moaning, and Jack comes up to her and he says, what seems to be the trouble, mother? And she looks up at him and she says, I'm tired and all stretched out like to lay down and die, but I can't. And Jack says, you can. Why can't you die? She looked up at him, and it took a second for the rest of her skin to catch up with her. And she said, don't you know? Some dang fool gone tied death up in a bag. Ain't nobody died around here for the longest time. And she walked on. Well, Jack, he started to think, and he thought, and he turned around, and he walked back. It took about another hour and a half to walk the 50 feet back to the king's house, and he pushed open the gate to the backyard, and he saw this kind of a blob of a thing lying there by the gate. And he says, morning, King. And he looked up at that poplar tree. It got a lot taller since the last time he looked at it. And they got that boy that he'd give the nickel to. That boy was 97 years old. He wasn't no use, so he got that boy's great-grandson, and he give him $50, inflation, and sent him up that tree. And the boy climbed the tree, and he found the bag, and he threw it down to Jack. Jack looked down at that bag, and he reached down, and he picked it up, and he untied the drawstrings, and he opened the bag. And out come death. And the very first person that death took was Jack. And that's the end of Jack in that story. And that is the story of Soldier Jack, which, as I said, has wandered around the world. There are German versions and Russian versions and Italian versions and English versions. Thank you so much for joining me this evening, and I hope you'll join me again next week for more stories. Good night, and love to you all.